Now it's on.
I'm going to show a slide. I might ask you to duck your head so people can see it. Welcome, everyone. My name is Robynne Anderson. I'm with Emerging Ag, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today during COP's Ag and Food Day. And we're going to be discussing one of the very exciting elements of the food system, which is the opportunity to think about the moonshot, to think about how we can do things ever more creatively. And so we're going to be discussing today how you can turn CO2 into protein, which is very cutting edge conversation. And I think we're going to hear a lot about really wonderful conceptual science, but also things that can take waste and turn them into food. It's almost the opposite of all the conversation we have here about food loss and waste. It's all about how we are trying to avoid putting food into waste. Here we're taking waste and thinking about making it into food. So let's talk a little bit about the context overall for this. First of all, today we're having a conversation about how we're going to implement the declaration that has been made by 150 countries here during COP28 to transform our food systems, to create a space for agri-food systems in nationally determined plans. And in that conversation, practically right now while we're speaking, FAO will be talking about setting a very concrete goal to reduce methane emissions in livestock by 2030. And there's an exciting discussion about the breadth of the food systems changes that are needed, including alternative proteins. So today we're going to hone in, and it's wonderful to have Jessica here. Jessica is the head of global affairs in Americas for Topsoe. Jessica, you're going to talk to us about this amazing idea of taking a waste product and making it into food. Can you explain a little bit?
Well, I'm a recovering lawyer, so I will do my best on the chemical engineering side. Thank you, Robynne. It's so great to be here, and thank you to We Mean Business for giving us this great space to do the panel and talk about these important issues. First, maybe a little bit about Topsoe. So we are an 83-year-old startup. And we are based in Copenhagen in Denmark, but we also have operations around the world and a manufacturing facility in the United States. We strive to perfect chemistry for a better world. And so part of that is all of the R&D that we've done around our electrolyzer that we'll talk about today. We still spend about 9% of our revenue on R&D. That's what we did last year, and it's about average for how much we spend. And so that gives us the kind of innovation that we're able to bring to bear in this conversation. The electrolyzer is a solid oxide electrolyzer, so it's a high temperature electrolyzer, which is different than the incumbent technology, PEM or alkaline, and I won't get into that. But suffice to say, they are low temperature electrolyzers. And the benefit of the high temperature of our SOEC is that it's about 30% more efficient. So if you're making hydrogen with it, it's about 30% more efficient than those technologies. So you can make the same amount of hydrogen with 30% fewer electrons, which is really game changing. In this context, you can think of it as something of an oxygen pump. And we are using it in this project, which we're very pleased to be working with Novozymes on the technology and the protein production side with the support of the Gates Foundation and the Novo Nordisk Foundation. And the project is a 2-year project in this initial phase to really build out a pilot scale biological and electrochemical process that will demonstrate the use of this SOEC electrolyzer to produce carbon monoxide and e-methanol to produce an acetate. And the acetate is what will replace sugar in the fermentation process to make food protein. I know there was a lot there. That's why I said it slowly. So sugar has been used in the fermentation process to produce food proteins for millennia. But of course, the issue with that is that you need a lot of land to grow the sugar. So the exciting part of this project for us is the ability to take this technology that will help us usher in the green hydrogen economy and also apply it to captured CO2 to produce that acetate for food protein to replace sugar. If we were to leverage this technology at full scale, we project that about 1 billion people could be fed on this technology, which of course is a significant contribution to helping solve our food insecurity challenges in this era of climate change. Klaus, I'm going to ask you to fact check me on this, but I think if we took all the CO2 from the cement industry in Egypt, we could avoid land use about the size of Argentina. Did I get that right?
That's correct.
Okay, great. So that's an overview of the project, and we're just so excited to be working with real experts in bioscience in Novozymes to kind of give them, this feedstock of CO2 to acetate food protein.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to throw it over to Klaus. Klaus is the Chief Science Officer at Novozymes, and Klaus, you actually know how to take an energy product, and then you two are working together to make it into food. Tell us about that enzyme, that conversion process.
Sure, will do. First, maybe introducing Novozymes. Not a lot of people know Novozymes. We are actually on almost 100-year-old startup in biotech. So when you say advanced biotech, think Novozymes rather than the usual new startups. Anyway, we have a commitment in our company to enable better lives and healthier lives for people using biosolutions, as we call it, biological solutions, that also will leave us with a better planet. And this fits right in, of course. This is about taking a different type of energy source of reduced carbon, and then through fermentation, these little wonderful microorganisms that do fermentation, you can convert that into either a complete, for example, milk identical protein, or whole protein systems like in microproteins or single cell proteins. So you can take either path from that. What you need is a carbon energy source, and that's what we arrive at with the acetate that the Topsoe catalyzer is providing. So this essentially means that I had a joke before. This is they produce the cornfield. We actually make it up to be the cow in a fermenter. So we can actually today, we know the technology is there today to do it. The question is, can you do it at scale? Can you do it at cost? And that's what we are working on in this program to do.
Well, just before we move down the rest of the panel, if I could ask you a couple of questions to just flesh that out a bit more. So this is really sort of a moonshot, exciting new technology project. How long do you think it would take to really understand if you could get to market?
So we have a very ambitious program, none at least sort of forced, you could say, by the dear foundation that helps us out with funding, to do it in 2 years, to actually be able to pilot the individual processes and know the cost calculation on everything. That includes yield, and that's improvements on both the catalyst side and on the fermentation side to increase the yields in the process. But 2 years, then we should have a view to how a factory will look that can scale and put product in market.
Well, Jessica mentioned 2 years at the beginning, and I didn't imagine that you would be potentially at factory scale in 2 years. So that's extraordinary.
Well, I think we will have a demonstrated process that we will feel confident can come to a factory demonstrated scale. So this is a bit of a science project over the next 24 months, which we started back in August.
A collaborative science project, and you have some other collaborators. So you've got funding from Novo Nordisk Foundation, I understand. How are they partnering with you?
Well, they bring the money bags in. and then they say, engineers and scientists go to work.
But I should say they are also funding, both the Gates and the Novo Nordisk Foundation are funding academic institutes that study this in detail. So the CORC Center in Aarhus, but also institutes in the U.S.
Washington University.
Washington University, and I believe also a group in St. Louis that they bring in for this.
So this is a whole research consortium.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Well, talking about the money, let's move on to Elizabeth. Elizabeth Alfano is the CEO of VegTech Invest. Elizabeth, tell us a little bit about how we get money into this sector.
First of all, I just want to say 86-year-old company and a 100-year-old company that call themselves startups. That's just a completely new definition of startup for me, so thank you for that. Yes, well, you've been at COP now probably for 10 days, and you've probably heard blended finance at least 4 times a day. So it is going to take all hands on deck when we talk about the global food supply system. It is the lowest hanging fruit. I understand it's the only sector that can get to net zero by 2030, so we can have a lot of impact if we focus specifically on this sector. So it's going to take government money, it's going to take philanthropic money, it's going to take Wall Street money. And this is my first COP where people are actually talking about bringing in the private sector. So I don't know if I can show a slide. I don't want to ask people to move. It's oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. We run the world's only sustainable food systems transformation ETF. An ETF is like a mutual fund, but it's more nimble. We'll just go with that in case you don't know what an ETF is. And we've been certified as the only ETF that is carbon neutral without buying offsets. According to the United Nations, offsets are just a Band-Aid, not really going to get us there. So we need more concrete action than that. So I asked the third-party certifier, ACA Globals, known around the world for their compliance and certifications, I asked them, well, how do I really explain that to people? That's maybe a little bit esoteric. So they came up with the global temperature warming potential of the ETF, and the ETF, having so many companies in sustainable food systems transformation, acts as sort of a reflection of the entire sector. And that sector is based on emissions avoidance. So they came up with the global temperature warming potential for the financial product EAT-V as 1.18. Now everyone is, hoping we get to 2, and many don't think that we'll be able to keep it at 2. And I said, well, wow, 1.18, that's well below the Paris Accords 1.5 and well below 2. But what does the rest of the world look like? Or what does this mean compared to what? And they said, well, the average person is investing in the S&P 500 index, and that global temperature warming potential is 3.9 degrees Celsius. So that's where our current money is going. Obviously, we need to divert it to more food sustainable programs, financial products, and innovations, and it's going to take investments at all stages: the ag tech, the innovation, the ingredients, the flavor, texture, the consumer packaged goods at the end. And so it really is all hands on deck. You can have your seats back. I'm sorry.
Fantastic. Well, it's great to talk about all hands on deck, and I think a wonderful place to talk about all hands on deck is Brazil, which has one of the most exciting and diverse agri-food sectors in the world, and also a huge land base, which we've certainly heard a lot even today on a panel with Nestlé and the Brazilian government talking about the extent to which they're converting the deforestation issue into a more positive story and finding good solutions working with the agri-food sector. I'd like to ask Carolina Carago from the Public Affairs team at Nestlé to talk a little bit about how you see this space, because you also represent the diversity of the food system in terms of the offerings at Nestlé.
Thank you so much, Robynne. Thank you so much for the invitation to this panel. Actually, it's good to hear about all the things that they have been said here, because it's going to be all hands on the deck. So it's going to be a need nor or, because it's going to be solutions on tax, on new products, on new forms of producing, but to transform the food systems. Actually, I think Nestlé has this power kind of improved, because we are connected directly to 500,000 farmers. So I think the most important thing to say is that the farmer is the center of this, because we need to help them to shift and to be more resilient on this transition. So I'm going to talk about, because the plans and the roadmap, sustainability for Nestlé, we have been doing this for more than 20 years, but actually our roadmap to net zero, we have committed up to 2018, and we do have some targets to deliver it. It's not about just reducing our 50% on emissions to 2030 and to decarbonize all the chain in 2050, but we have to put some milestones along the way. So considering this, we put regenerative agriculture, one of our key priorities, to do this transition through the farmers, because we need to do this with our whole supply chain. So we are talking about farmers, we're talking about distributions, we're talking about sourcing and other kinds of raw materials, but in Brazil, for example, we do have 500,000 farmers, and the main chains that we are working is dairy, cocoa, and coffee. So some of them are the largest programs of Nestlé. So we are talking about carbon, and a huge part of our emissions comes from dairy. So considering dairy, we're not going to do this by ourselves. So Nestlé has a program. Actually, it began in 2006. We have this manual. It's called Nature por Niño. Niño, it's the same, it's nido for you guys in other countries. But actually this program, it began actually only with discussions on quality and how to actually share good practices to farmers. But during the years, we improve, and we are discussing and we are measuring other indicators. So this program now is super mature. We launched a new program within this manual, and we did a partnership with Embrapa. Embrapa is the Public Institute of Research and Development in Brazil. He's really well respected. And now we applied this manual and the program within these 1,200 farmers. So for the past 2 years, we have been measuring several indicators in this farmers. So we did choose part of the farmers to not only provide technical assistance, but also transfer technology and supply to money also, because it needs money to do this. So we invest on this. That's why it's a big challenge for us. So I'm really Elizabeth just told about the money in the table, so it's going to be a good example, actually. So, and this, we have several indicators. So, for example, we improve water measurement, and in the past 2 years, only in water, we have been saving 75,000 million liters per water. So when it comes to other indicators, for example, for soil, the health of the soil, so it's important for them to understand that they can plant and can use the land for other cultures. So, and for example, to cover the land for the whole year, it's really important for the emissions. So considering this, we have improved, and we have, like, for the past 1 year, we measure 9,200 hectares that we recovered on pasture. But I think the most important indicator that we have on our regenerative practice during 1 year, that we had like 9.5 reduction on emissions. And together with this, it came up that we had a reduction on costs on 8%, and an increase of profitability for the farmer for 4%. This is really important, because in the end of the day, he needs money. It's not easy, it's not cheap. And when we do this to scale up this kind of things, we do this like workshops among the farmers, and they explain. So it's really good, because the farmers, they see it, that just 1 year of project, and you can see how it's possible to do the transition. So I think that for Nestle, it's important that we shift the whole, actually the whole chain together with us, but especially the farmers, because they are really going to suffer more on the just transition. So we are kind of talking about people in the end of the day.
I think that's beautifully said, especially at a moment during this COP when we still don't have a reference to farmers anywhere in the document. And they are the stewards of about 50% of the world's land. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit and how it relates to this project, because as Carolina said really effectively, it's going to take all of these solutions, right? It's not only one solution, it's about making sure that all parts of the agri-food system are working better. But if I were trying to conceptualize the project, if we were to think about a world that's got a growing population, a finite land base, all the things we talk about here, potential for more and more climate issues, this seems like what you would do to create food in outer space, right? It's the Star Trek moment. It's the space where you're making food where there isn't obviously a way to make food. What capacity, first of all, is that analogy fair? And what capacity does this technology have to deal with absence of resources? In other words, if you were to build this out, how could you feed people in places where we're having incidents of drought or stress? And how mobile or nimble would it be?
So that's a great question, Robynne, and I think that's exactly the point. This is not meant to replace conventional agriculture necessarily. It's meant to help us use our land more efficiently and help those, especially in low and middle income countries that don't have access to conventional agriculture in the way that other parts of the world do, access food security. So it's additive, as Carolina said. I mean, this is all of these opportunities and all of the innovation that comes from this project is really additive.
Amazing. And then, Klaus, you work throughout that value chain. You work with some of the extension of those farmer groups, and as well as the food processors, all the way through. People may not realize how broad Novozymes' footprint is in the agri-food sector with this kind of innovative technology. How do you think this would impact our land use?
Yeah, but so we're talking about a future where nutritional demand will increase. People get hopefully wealthier. They would look to substantiate the diet with more protein, and we're going to be more people. And as you said, we already today have 50% of arable land under management in some form of agricultural systems. And then it has to come together, all of it. That also need to be managed in an effective way. We only have this land, we only have this water, we only have this carbon cycle, you could say, and we keep sort of going into the bank and emitting carbon into the air. We don't make deposits, we don't make pay the interest, basically, right? So we need to really make the existing systems more sustainable, and we can certainly do that. There's biological technologies that will help enable better plant growth, as inoculants to seeds, as ways you can enhance. Also, when you do animal farming, the energy output of the crops when they get fed to the animal through enzymes. You can make sure we do it in a more sustainable way without using antibiotics, and then you can process efficiently the foods. Now, this one offers, an alternative. Rather than taking in the last 50% for agricultural purpose, we can build a path to enable protein production without the use of land, at least to the extent we're talking about. What we need is electrical energy and carbon dioxide. And for example, if you look out the window from here, you have plenty of that right here. If you consider solar energy as a renewable source of energy and the CO2 available here. So just a thought experiment, right? If you built such a factory here that we're talking about, you would be able to feed milk analog protein to the entire United Arab Emirates without using, you could say, more of livestock or traditional agriculture. So it's very feasible for arid regions to develop such.
Just a quick question. What does that factory look like? Do you get to have a bunch of them in a lot of places? Is it really about putting it in one region and serving that region? How does that factory?
I think what you will see in the start, we would be looking to put it where we can secure sources of sustainable CO2 and electricity, also sustainable electricity, so renewable electricity to begin with. But the idea is, of course, you can copy that model and then place it. And that's really what the foundations are looking for, of course, because they're looking for this to enable food security, where there's less ability to grow, you could say, protein in the same way we can do it, let's say, in Latin America or North America and Europe, for example.
Amazing. Elizabeth, how many of the projects that you've got in your ETF are these kinds of moonshots?
Yes. So in the ETF, we have more than 35 companies globally around the world that are focused on sustainable proteins, food systems transformation. And again, it starts in the ag tech area, and then it goes to the ingredients and the flavor texture, and the innovations and the technologies, and then the consumer packaged goods at the end. We're trying to focus on the entire supply chain. We really see the growth. Obviously, we have to focus on making money for our shareholders, stakeholders. So we really see the growth is happening in the supply chain, that B2B, the picks and shovels of it all. So we cover the whole gamut, 35 to 37 companies that are really focused on primarily replacing animals as they're inefficient. What the capital markets, Wall Street, what it loves efficiency. What it doesn't like to see inefficiency. And when it sees inefficiency, it immediately says, I can make money here, because that's where disruption happens. No one merely makes money because a company has 3% more revenue at the end of the year. You make enormous amounts of wealth because we've gone from the horse and buggy to the car, from the landline to the cell phone, from developing film. Who is old enough to remember standing in line to develop your film? Sounds crazy, right? Who would develop film? Okay, so these kind of transitions, now you're talking about real wealth creation. So they look towards that. And where do we get these efficiencies? Well, as we try to solve the mathematical equation of feeding more people more nutritiously in a shorter amount of time with food that travels shorter distances while using fewer resources and creating less damage, you have to look at the solution that uses less land, less water, less greenhouse gas emissions, less energy, and that's sustainable proteins.
Great. And then as we move down the chain, just to flag, if anyone in the room has a question, signal me. We'll be moving to a few other questions as we go through. But Carolina, you were talking about regenerative agriculture, and you were talking about the landscape, particularly in Brazil, but of course across the world. When you're talking about regenerative, you're talking about soil health is really a central focal point of this. And you've got huge grasslands that you're dealing with in South America in particular. How do you see this journey between these kinds of new technologies and spaces that have soils and grasslands?
So thank you for the question. Actually, I'd like first to point out one important thing. When we talk about regenerative landscapes, we are talking about the health of the soil, but we are talking about the water, when we are talking about the livelihood of the farmers, and it's not just one thing, it's a combined indicators, and in one special one, it's biodiversity. So it's not only one thing, it's like a combined shift of things that must happen. So regarding Latin America, we know now, for example, I'll talk about Brazil, but can talk about other countries also. For example, my colleague has said that we're going to have to feed the world, and we have to increase the production. So in order to do this, efficiency is the best way to do it. So for the started, we need to start to measuring the things, and to come up with transparency. Actually, when we're not disclosing your data and you don't know what you're talking about, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to engage everyone on this pathway. So this is one of the most important for us to do in the beginning. So second, we have to engage, for example, first of all, the governments, because actually they can do the moves regarding public policies. Second, all the private sector should be together. This is a pre-competitive agenda, because we're talking about the health of the planet, and we only have one planet. It's not that we have a planet B for us to go. So it's, even though they're trying to produce something outside of the planet, I think we're not ready yet. But mainly, I think the most important part of this equation actually is that the transition on regenerative agriculture, it takes time. It's a journey. So considering that it's a journey, you have to be really science-based. You have to measure. You have to have funds. And you needed to do this together. So it's not going to be alone. For example, we are seeing other projects, for example, in the cocoa. In Brazil, we have a type of cocoa, it's called cabruca. And this type of cocoa, it's an agroforest, actually, plantation. So the cocoa really needs the forest stands in order to develop. So it's pretty much it's an engage that you can do for the farmer, for not to deforest actually, and to plant something that it's going to have an income and to preserve the forest as well. So for this, we are discussing together with the government, how can we improve this and preserve the forest, and in order for the farmer not to do anything to harm the forest. So one of the things that we learn is that technical assistance and education is actually the key, because they need knowledge. And I think all of us in this room, we have knowledge and we can share. So this is the base of the equation to have success in our sectors.
Can I riff off of that for a second?
Sure.
I just love what you're saying about farmers, and I know everyone talks about farmers here, but sometimes I feel like they talk about them as children that we don't want to forget, or something like this, that they're not, that I don't feel that way. Farmers, unless the audience or the other members of the panel disagree, they're the only ones who can sequester, and they're sitting on the land.
Exactly.
So I speak from a capital markets perspective, I want to see them so well paid. So, I just love that you're bringing this up, that farmers are such a major part of the equation, and I think there's an opportunity for them to do much better than they do today.
Well, as a Canadian farmer, so perhaps I should say, yeah, indeed, we're not children.
Yes, I'm sorry, didn't mean that to me. But it's often seem like, oh, we must take care of them, and I think they actually have a lot of power.
Well, and indeed, there are 1 billion of them in the world, right? And we do have this complicated situation in which they own half of the world's resource, in the sense that they are farming it. Some of them don't have clear land tenure, including a number of our women around the world. But just to say that I think it's also a reality that rural areas bear 80% of the world's multidimensional poverty. So though I have the blessing of coming from a farm in Canada that is a commercial operation, the reality is the largest share of people in the world who go hungry are themselves farmers. So this is the complexity of that conversation.
Hence the word transformation, including starting with farmers and all the way up.
Exactly. Getting them well paid is a great idea. Martin, I think you have a question.
Thank you so much, Robynne. Martin Gehlen from Tetra Pak. I have a question on the research project. You mentioned you need sustainable supply of carbon dioxide. Does that mean in the future, in the large scale, would you need the carbon capture technology to be more evolved, or is there enough CO2 from chemical bioprocesses? Or
Yeah, I was waiting for someone to ask that question, and I should have mentioned it earlier because that's the feedstock we need to make this all work. And there are a couple of different ways we can get it, right? There's biogas, there's flue gas. We can use already commercial scale A-line scrubber to capture the CO2. Not that that's without challenge, right? I think you've probably heard a lot of conversations in over the course of COP around how we can do that more efficiently and cost effectively. So yes, that is a major component needed to make this project work.
Yeah, so you could say normal power plants, cement factories, but an interesting story would be to look, let's say, at the U.S. biofuel sector, which is actually a large sector that emit. Their off gas is almost 90% pure CO2, and they are working to sequester that. So that's an enormous source of CO2 available. That's the thing. I think the real caveat is to get to let's say, the energy, the renewable energy, or nuclear power, energy that doesn't pollute CO2 or emissions. And if you do the calculations, now you mentioned the example before, just the CO2 from cement factories in Egypt, just the vast amount of that would feed quite a lot of people. In order to make protein for 1 million people, you need a hundredth of a normal-sized nuclear power plant in terms of energy, and only half, or maybe let's just say the full emission for a biofuels plant in the U.S., and there's 240 of them. So just look at that potential.
Maybe I could just add one comment, because the two key inputs are renewable energy and CO2. And you need maybe a very little quantity of the CO2, and we have plenty of it, but you need a much larger quantity of the renewable electricity, and we need to get more of that deployed. And so we were really pleased to see over 120 countries support the tripling renewables goal here. We hope to see more countries come on board. I mean, that is the linchpin to all of this, right?
Fantastic. And we have another question.
Hi, Paul Benjamin from Bloomberg NEF. We actually work quite closely with Topsoe. Before we came here, we were in St. Louis in a discussion there, and I was just going to second what you said. The big ethanol plants are running into trouble with their CCS pipeline issues, so that's clearly something you could make use of. A question is, once you produce this protein, is it input to a all-protein food maker? Describe the rest of the chain once you've...
So I tried to describe in the beginning that there's two paths. One is what we call precision fermentation. You've probably maybe heard others talk about it. You can make identical proteins to animal-derived milk protein, beta-lact, globulin, alpha-lact. What is today considered a rich source of nutrition protein is whey protein, for example, right? You can completely mimic that through precision fermentation. And you can do it with 90% less emission and footprint and water through fermentation. Now, the other thing you can also do is, many eat mushrooms, right? For protein and for other. You can do that in fermentation tanks too, so you can make what you call single cell protein. Now that has a more complicated path to market because people don't know it. When people know something, there's an immediate adaptation. You can simply make the protein powder and you can constitute a milk or use it for cheese manufacture or what have you. But putting microprotein or single cell protein in the market has a little longer runway for market placement. It is there today, but not in a large scale yet.
And if the audience will forgive us doing a little bit of nerding out, I think a few of us are pretty curious about this. So if you need to be next to perhaps an energy facility, as an example, and you need a source of CO2, then how many of these do you need around the world? What is the footprint? Are you making that protein and then shipping it everywhere in a relatively few facilities, or do you imagine this being in many, many places?
I think I believe it will need to proliferate. It will start somewhere where you can make it run and ensure this. Whenever you build a first plant, you're not going to hit issues and you're going to deal with that. But when you have a repetitive model, you would place it where the need is. Bigger cities, global south, arid regions with a lot of sun, if you consider solar as part of the energy source, potentially. So you would see it actually placed and creating jobs also in the parts where it's getting consumed, right? So,
Can I add to that?
I was actually going to throw to you next, so you go right ahead.
Again, back to the word transformation. So right now we ship a lot of food, heavy animals, for example, live and dead, around the world. Just think about if you had local protein right for that, probably won't be down to the zip code, but down to the state, down to the city. So just think of that. We were talking about the equation. You have to make more food more nutritiously, but shorter distances. So just imagine right there the shorter distances, and then the land that you aren't using because you're not farming animal proteins, et cetera. So just so much efficiencies here that I think the capital will. Right now, we talk a lot about who will give us money? Only taking 2% of the climate tech funding, and everyone's asking for more. I actually think the funding is going to come because the efficiencies are so clear.
What a great point. We're seeing agriculture get a tiny proportion of the available climate fund. More than double goes to energy. So it's super interesting to have that energy angle as part of this. And maybe that's part of why you've had success at the funding, is that double lens. But thank you, Elizabeth. It's so important that we get some of the breakthrough finance into this sector at every level. Now, you've been doing that at Nestle in the sense that you talked about putting it through your value chain as part of that solution and measured it fairly concretely about how you were doing with farmers. I think one thing that I hear as a farmer a lot is, make these changes. We made those changes on our farm back in the 90s. We moved to conservation tillage, and we funded that entirely ourselves. The reality is that it gave us great benefits on the farm. And you just talked about that you saw good changes and profitability for farmers. How can the value chain help farmers get that pull through better?
Good question, Robynne. Actually, this is kind of the game changer on the scale up the projects. So we are talking about the technical assistance, but we are also talking about knowledge and funding. So, for example, Nestle is funding up to 2025 1.2 billion francs on these 500,000 farmers. So part of this money comes directly to the farmers, for example, in Brazil. But when we discuss these things with the financial market, the main important thing is what is about the risk and the guarantee. So actually we are funding a loan because we are talking about the livelihood of the farmer. We are talking about they need to earn more. So in our programs, actually, we are paying for more to implement all of these practices, but it's really good when they enhance productivity and sees that they can earn more. So, for example, the program on the Nature by Ninho, in Brazil, we have 2 harvests per year. And in some of regions, we are going through 3 harvests. So it's talking about efficiency. So in the first harvest, when we were doing this program with the dairy farmers, actually, we didn't have much farmers. It was a minor pilot. In the second harvest, it has doubled because they all have seen in the first how it was possible actually to increase profitability. So in the end of the day, we need to provide the guarantees and we need to take the risk. So this is the main important thing to bring actually the capital from Wall Street. So we need to unblock this money. For example, in Brazil, we do have a program, a financial program from the government. It's called Plano Safra, and part of this money goes directly to small farmers. But actually, it's not enough considering the volume of small families, farmers in Brazil. So it's really difficult, actually. So for us, the key, it's the capacity. We need to provide the funds now, but actually we're kind of calling, it's a call to action, because we need to do this. We need to transform them to a more resilient, actually, farmers in order to do this transition, because otherwise, for example, in Brazil, we have been seeing droughts, we have been seeing floods, so it's already happening. And I'm actually feel like, I don't know if we're going to have probably the food systems in the text or not. I don't think we're going to have this in the general texts. But actually, considering that we did had all these countries signing the Food Systems Declaration, I think it's important because we are calling the subject on the table. So I think we have a big move, and all the companies, all this, the academia and the NGOs, and I think we are together in this. So it's pretty much this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Indeed, we have this juxtaposition of having political will here with 150 countries signing the Emirati Declaration, but we don't have an outcome in the joint work plan on agriculture and food systems. So there is...
And I'm sorry, just to interrupt, and it's quite confusion because the food systems can be part of the solution. So it's a super low-hanging fruit, actually, to accelerate. So we need to reduce fossil fuels, but actually we do have to work in the other alternatives in order to move faster, because we don't have time, actually. So it's kind of confusing when we're kind of struggling with sectors when we should be moving all of them on, you know?
Well, why don't we use that as our wrap-up comments as we come down the aisle? Elizabeth, how do we get to action?
If I may show one last slide. I'm so sorry, you two, you have to move it. I'm so sorry. If I may show one last slide, according to the Boston Consulting Group, when you're investing in green technology, alternative building materials, electric vehicles, alternative energy, or alternative proteins, it's 3 times to 40 times more impactful at reducing greenhouse gas emissions to invest in alternative proteins, sustainable proteins, and the food system than it is in the other areas. And the reason why is it costs a lot less to transform that supply chain, and therefore you get change faster, therefore you get results faster. So I guess I would end in saying that I actually know, as you say, that food system transformation is the low-hanging fruit, and I think it's going to be where the money flocks to, and that it will flow in because it's really the only chance to hit our goals by 2030.
Absolutely. We need that money. We need that investment. We need that innovation. Klaus, you are our scientist on the panel. How do we get innovation on this agenda?
But I think you're already seeing it. It's a sort of, you're seeing it across the value chain. Bioag has grown tremendously. So the use and innovation in agricultural solutions to help replace, you could say, fossil-based or chemical-based pesticides, for example. So it's happening. It's happening across the value chain. It's happening in the plant space, right? The plant-based foods. There's still a lot of innovation to happen there in terms of this has to translate into cost-efficient for the consumer and palatable and nutritious. And there, I think fermentation or precision fermentation can come in to help that. And then, of course, you can add on top, hopefully soon, a moonshot of using, helping the agricultural system provide more outcomes through technologies that we're trying to develop here with a CO2 to protein program.
Fantastic. And from our experts at Topsoe, how do we take the agri-food sector that's not getting this attention, as Elizabeth said so well, and combine it with people like energy and chemicals and all these other sectors that are getting the attention?
Yeah, well, Robynne, that's one of the reasons why Topsoe wanted to bring this panel of experts together to really showcase how this technology for the energy transition, our solid oxide electrolyzer cell that we've been working on since the mid-'80s, right? And we've been tinkering with it and perfecting it, can really unlock all kinds of benefits for the energy transition, not just getting us to zero carbon energy production for energy intensive sectors and long distance transportation that are 30% of our global emissions, but also helping us combat another problem that's just being exacerbated by climate change in food insecurity and food scarcity. So, again, I want to go back to, this is not without challenge, of course, but we're here to talk about how to face those challenges, and the deployment of renewable electricity and zero carbon electricity production is going to be critical to get this effort off the ground in particular, and the energy transition writ large.
Beautifully said. So as we wrap up today, I just want to thank you all for attending online and here in the room, and to thank our acetate makers, our protein makers, our financiers, and our consumer good products companies for thinking about an agri-food value chain that incorporates holistically everything from energy to respecting our farmers to using our agri-food systems in a way that holistically addresses our soils, our biodiversity, our water, the entire health of our planet, and the nutrition that will feed our people. Thank you so much.